Gossip in Storybrooke was like a wildfire in a dry forest. It seemed that Emma Swan was every bit the firebrand that her mother had been before the curse. Like Snow White, the newest princess in Storybrooke had been dealt enough hard knocks to make her tough, but where her mother had wielded a sword, Emma chose a chainsaw. Rumpelstiltskin liked her already. It had been too long since anyone had the knowledge or the nerve to go against Regina, and to do it in such a direct way sat well with Rumpelstiltskin's own dramatic tendencies. He saw the woman in the street when he emerged from his shop, walking side by side with Henry, the mayor's boy. There was no mistaking the genetics. He could see Snow White in their matching smiles and stubbornness, her prince in the way they carried themselves. Those children, he knew, were born to be heroes. It was courting disaster, but he had to see for himself how their gracious mayor was taking matters. That she had already tried to have Miss Swan framed for theft suggested she was not entirely happy about the newest arrival. It amused him how, now, thinking on how Regina had embraced a self-fulfilling prophecy so readily. He warned her the curse would be broken, and yet she still cast it. Maybe she had realized who Emma Swan really was. Maybe she hadn't. In part, that was why he walked into her garden and stood, silently watching as she brushed shreds of torn wood from the sawn stump of her apple tree's branch. "What a mess," he murmured, finally approaching. "Not for long," she replied with a dismissive glance in his direction. "What can I do for you, Mr. Gold?" He searched his memories and almost smiled. Cameron Gold had tolerated the mayor and her influence, but he had never liked nor respected her. Just went to show that there were some things that even magic was too powerful to change. And yet, she had needed his skills and knowledge enough to come to him. "I was just in the neighborhood," he said, walking closer to the tree and her. "Thought I'd pop by." He watched her face, the smug smile hovering too meekly about her lips. "Lovely to see you in such high spirits." She laughed. "Well, it's been a good day," she said, dusting her hands together. "I just rid the town of an unwanted nuisance." "Emma Swan." Gold paused at the tree, reaching up to the apples. "Really?" "Yes," Regina said, smiling. "I bet she's halfway to Boston by now." "Oh, I wouldn't bet that." He plucked an apple, turning it in his hands. "I've just seen her strolling down the main street with your boy." He met her eyes, saw the panic, the fear, the fury. Thick as thieves they looked. "What?" "Ah, fear, doubt, confusion, all useful." He smiled, just a little. "Perhaps you should have come to me." She narrowed her eyes, and he cheerfully elaborated. "If Miss Swan is a problem you can't fix, I'm only too happy to help." He paused, then added, "For a price, of course." "I'm not in the business of making deals with you anymore," she said, turning back to the tree. Rumpelstiltskin gazed at her. "To which deal are you referring?" he murmured, remembering the last and most important deal he had made with her, years before. Whether it still held, he had no idea. This was a land with no magic. If that deal held, then there would be others soon coming to fruition. His heart pounded in a wretched human beat. He didn't know if he was afraid that the magic wouldn't hold or that it would. She turned with a sharp look. "You know what deal." He scanned through his memories as gold. "All right, yeah. The boy I procured for you." He hid a smile. "Henry. Did I ever tell you what a lovely name that was?" He toyed with the apple, remembering a queen, a price, her father. "However did you pick it?" It seemed that wound was still open, and pouring salt in it did little to help. "Did you want her to come to town?" She turned on him. "You wanted this to happen, didn't you? Your finding Henry wasn't an accident, was it?" "Whatever do you mean?" Rumpelstiltskin asked, smiling Gold's trite smile. "Where did you get him?" Their eyes locked, and even if she had no magic, there was still fury blazing enough to quail a lesser man. "Do you know something?" she asked, low and calm. I have no idea what you're implying, Rumpelstiltskin said. This was a game he had long mastered, even if it had been some years since he had practiced. His mask was far superior to any she could ever muster. I think you do. There was a ferocity in her gaze that spoke of contained terror. Who is this woman, his mother, this Emma Swan? Rumpelstiltskin drew himself inward, letting Cameron Gold to the fore. He was still a cynical, bitter man, but without the knowledge of who Regina was and why he loathed her. The last thing he needed now was the Queen suspecting that he knew anything. He would become an enemy again instead of a lackey, and if he meant to help the Savior, the last thing he needed was Regina breathing down his neck. He shrugged, smiled placidly. I've no idea, he said. I'd never even heard of Emma Swan until I ran into her at Granny's last night. Never heard of her? Regina stepped closer to him. You arranged the adoption. The closed adoption, he reminded her. There were no names. Not until you had your Henry. If you think I could find out not only who the mother was, but somehow prompt your son to go looking for her. He laughed, shaking his head. You give me far too much credit, Madame Mayor. Regina looked at him, her dark eyes narrowed. You know something, she said. I know that you've met someone who's as stubborn as you, he replied. He inclined his head in an approximation of a polite bow. If you'll excuse me, my wife is expecting me for dinner. He started past her, but she stepped in front of him. What do you know? She asked, fixing his eyes with hers. He could practically feel her reaching into his mind to twist him into obedience and get the knowledge she needed. I don't know what you're talking about, he said, taking a deliberate bite of the apple he was holding. He chewed, meeting her gaze steadily. It was time to test how his deals had withstood the breaking of the world. Please get out of my way. She jolted as if he had thrown a bucket of cold water over her, then slunk aside, confusion rife on her face. Rumpelstiltskin wanted to caper and whoop in exultation. It wasn't much power to hold, but it was enough. It was a weapon, a small one which must be used with care, but a weapon nonetheless. He walked past her, leaning heavily on the cane, and to add insult to injury, tossed the apple over his shoulder. It was hardly the most extravagant declaration of war, but for now, it would do.